What's going on YouTube? Welcome to another live portrait painting session. We are going to spend a little bit longer with this one than my previous live streams for the past year. So let's just go ahead and get started. When I say classic style or classic approach to the painting, what I mean is I'm going to draw first before I apply paint. So even though this is going to be an acrylic painting, I'm going to start off with a drawing, which is going to be just like with oil painting. The same kind of concept, really. It's just when you imply the word classic, it usually means you're drawing first. So I'm just using soft vine charcoal, and I'm going to get an idea of where I'm going to place the head. With acrylics, I'm starting to realize that and maybe it could be with the acrylics that I'm using because they are the cheaper ones, but I'm finding that it's actually easier to build up to the light by starting off with white and using the darks to build. I find that that's been a little bit easier because I even with the glazing medium, I find that acrylics, they still don't get as dark as oil paint, and that's just mainly because of it could be because of the acrylics I'm using, it could be for many factors, but what I'm doing here is pretty much standard. This model has her shirt or her collar covering this part of her chin, so I'm just going to place that in there. And the link to the reference is in the description box of the video. So this is a little bit earlier in the day. I scheduled it 15 minutes actually before we started doing this to hope that some of you would be waiting for the stream. I also appear to be having internet problems, so I apologize for that if the stream is a little bit disrupted. Now with this start, with the block in here, what I'm trying to do is just get the basic big proportions, the big picture, and once I get the proportions close enough to where I want them to be, then I will go in with acrylic and start to basically ink in the lines, which is exactly the same as what you would see me do with oil paint, but it's going to be easier with acrylic because it's going to dry really fast. And you see a lot of painters start off with acrylics anyway and then work their way into oil paint, so this shouldn't really come as that much of a surprise. But if it does, then that's a good thing. Maybe learning something new. But yeah, shout out to Herman for showing up first, writing the first comment, which is just titled "So." Like I said, I tried to be a little strategic about the planning of the stream. Planned it about 15 minutes right before I hit the go live button. So I know that most of you are, the notifications are not as prevalent as they used to be with me. So hopefully that little delay will help some of you catch the stream. So pretty simple proportions here. It looks weird, of course, because it's in a linear style. You usually see me go right into color with acrylic or with oil paint. Um, so when it comes to the accuracy of the drawing, I typically don't like to measure. So I try to do as much as I can by eye. And I'm still going to stay true with that. And that's because what I'm trying to show you, what I've been trying to show you for years, is a way to use a reference that translates well to painting a live model, painting a model from real life. Okay, so that's about good. I mean, I've got the shape of the head, which is pretty much like this, and should be ready to go in with the acrylic paint for the outlines. Hey George, welcome, welcome. So what I'm going to do is just lightly ghost the drawing with a fan brush. I get the gist of the basic shapes. It's not going to be perfect, but I've got an idea now. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, outside shape of the head, all that stuff. So I'm going to get a smaller brush than I would normally use, and we'll be a little bit careful about these lines. And now I'm going to add some acrylic, and I'm using a Stay Wet palette to hold my acrylics. Hey Beanpot. And this is actually just this is a plexiglass. So we're going to be using a dry palette so that you can actually see what colors I'm using. So I'm not going to put that much paint out at once because it is a dry palette. So I'm going to end up losing the majority of the paint. And I suggest you paint with one of these. It's linked in the description box of the video, but I can't do that with a stream because it'll drip. So it's my sacrifice for you. I'm going to thin out the paint a little bit with water. As this is plexiglass, I should be able to, with a razor blade, scrape some of the paint, the dry paint off, at least in theory. Okay, so start off with the landmarks of the face. So how close are their eyes? And think about a forensic sketch artist. They're going to be not so much, at least, I mean, in theory, right? I'm not a forensic sketch artist, but I'm thinking a lot of times they're going to ask questions about the eyes. And the eyes are very important here. These two little dots are my tear ducts, landmarks for the eyes. How close are the eyes? How far apart are the eyes? With this model, it's just a generic image from Unsplash. Pretty much kind of what you'd expect like a standard pose would look like. Standard head, not the eyes not too far apart, not too close. Like I said, the image is linked in the description box of the video in case you want to do the same painting with me. Or you can use this video as a sleeping aid, if whatever helps you. I'm just using burnt umber to ink these lines in. So it started off with those two dots, basically giving me the angle of the eyes, which is, I don't know, looking at the reference, it's pretty much straight. So I'm going to move this up and move this down. It's pretty much straight. So relatively slow, probably boring for most of you. But this is, in essence, what you want if you're going to be super tedious about your start. those landmarks have to be very precise. And it is a painting after all. If this video ends up getting any kind of attention, then someone out there is going to say that this doesn't look anything like the model, which it should resemble the model but not be a perfect photographic rendition of the model. Always remember the simple concept that we are not printers. Leave that for your inkjet printer, your AI generated pictures. I'm going to look at how close the edge of the eye is to the outside shape. This is a live stream, so I won't talk as much unless you ask me a question, and I do appreciate any art related questions as it will help the stream. Cleaning off the brush every once in a while. Once I feel the paint start to dry. Now, if you were to do a very important commission, or if I were to do a very important commission, I'd probably start with this classic style approach, because it tends to lend itself towards more accuracy, especially when the more time you spend drawing, the better. It's not going to harm you. With acrylic, if you make a mistake in terms of accidentally putting the lips up here, for some wild example, it happens. But if you make a mistake with acrylic, it's not the end of the world. It does dry right away, and you can't do anything about it. It's gonna dry. But you can always paint right over it. So don't be too scared to make any kind of mistakes. Usually in the beginning of a painting, you get the mistakes out as quickly as you can. So don't be afraid of making a mistake. And if you're drawing a person from real life, you typically have a timer, 20 minutes at a time, 30 minutes at a time. Typically it's 20 minutes. Hold on a second. Yeah, so typically it's 20 minutes. 30 minutes is rare. But this approach kind of gives you a way to manage your time. So in the first 20 minutes, maybe devote it to just that charcoal. The other 20 minutes devoted to this. And it'll help you keep organized. Okay, so now that we have the basic shape, the lines are now inked in. This should be dry as can be, the first marks. Even the ones we just placed should be somewhat almost dry. Not completely dry, but pretty much all of this stuff is dry. So here's what I would suggest with the classical approach. Go in with thinner washes of paint, and now with a bigger brush. So same burnt umber. The brush is pretty thin. Appreciate all the likes. Thank you for liking the video, those of you that did. Now this is just a thin wash, but not too thin to the point where it's going to drip. And so we're going to be building up the darks from here. I have to add some more paint. Still the same burnt umber. Paint is a little thin, not to the point where it will drip. And that apparently wasn't dry. And I expected to dry faster than that. Got another like, thank you for the like. And we had already placed that shadow down, so no need to do anything with that. Okay, so now we'll go back to the big brush. Now we'll add another color, which is going to be black. Remember, acrylics, the problem that can occur with acrylics is they don't get as dark as oil paint. So I'm going to utilize the white of the canvas to give us the maximum contrast. And this should be dry. That's close enough. I'm going to use some of the tone of the umber to be maybe like a strand of hair, like that. So that way we utilized the umber to be some of the highlights with the dark of the hair. Obviously we'll go into it with color later. Hey Army, welcome, welcome. Now we're gonna add the background. So we're gonna go, it's white. It's gonna be just black and white. So I'm taking the paint off of my Stay Wet palette because that's where I'm storing it, because the Stay Wet palette keeps it from drying. Still no color, not for a while. I'm thinning out the paint with water. Not too much, not to the point where it's dripping. This is a layered approach, a planned, strategic, layered approach to create an acrylic portrait painting similar to the oil painting style, but with acrylic. but be cautious to not use too much water. A good rule of thumb is if it's dripping, it's too thin. Hey, His Cranston. Oh, thank you for that comment. Appreciate it. Been struggling this year as a YouTuber, but you know, part of it is it's kind of down to just doing more of this. I want to do more of it. I've also taken some time off to do this, to plan out this layered approach for you. Someone asked me to do a stream earlier in the day, so I decided I would do that today. Now there's little gaps of white by the hair. I'm trying to take it out, as many of them out as I can now. And just leave the white of the canvas for here. Okay. So I'm going to clean off the brush. Again, just using water. No mediums. Not yet. Okay. So we're going to go back to the smaller brush. Same kind of idea, but now with the face. Thinning out the paint just to the point where it's not dripping. So usually I won't put the pupil in this early, but as we are building the darks, it can be helpful to do that. And this is dry. I mean, not dry. This is not dry. So I'm going to have to use an oil painting thing to support my hand. This is a layered approach, as I keep saying, so I would normally not put a dark value for the eyebrow, but we're going to paint so many layers over it that it's just going to help to have something dark there. So it's going to look almost like a comic book at first. We're going for maximum contrast between light and shadow. Clean off the brush with the water. And now we're going to introduce color. First thing I'm going to do though is add the color. add the colors respectively. So we've got yellow ochre. I'm only going to add as much color as I can use in a short time interval, as this is a dry palette. This is called Bright Red. Remember, these are cheaper acrylic paints, linked in the description box of the video. You've got your umber and you've got the black already. The blue is going to be ultramarine blue. Add a little more black. Okay, so we want this to be dry, and I don't think it's completely dry. So we gotta be a little careful about what we do with the lines. We don't want to lose the lines. Now what I'll do as this is drying is I'll just go ahead and start to mix some darker skin tones around the edge of the hair. Starting off first with restating the darks. Remember I said darks are going to be the issue with acrylic. So we're going to have to layer as much of it as we can. Alright, so now we can mix a skin tone. Yellow ochre, red, white, some type of grayed out orange or pink will be fine. Don't worry about the edge drying too sharp. All we're doing is focusing on this edge, not that one. We can even use this for this plane here. Under the eyes even. So that should be good. Now we're going to move up from that value. By the time we do that, everything here should be dry. I'm gonna add some blue as it's getting a little too red. But either way, this part doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so while this is still wet, what I'm going to do is now apply a thin coat of paint over the light, thin skin color, essentially a glaze, just using water. And we can use our glazing medium, just a little of it. I don't know if it's going to actually stay. Linked in the description box of the video. Alright, so this is good. Now we're going to cover the white as fast as we can. Just like an oil painting, it's a glaze. Same idea though, you don't want it to be so thin that it's dripping. So getting the right consistency is going to take time and practice. Don't expect to get the consistency right first try. Okay, so now we've killed off the white, but while it's still wet, just like with an oil painting, with a glaze, I typically like to paint into the glaze while I can. So just adding straight white to this while it's still wet. Remember what I said, the problem is with the darks. So we're going to have to push a little harder with the light. Okay, I want to clean off the brush. Now we're going to do something interesting with the palette. We're going to transition from the holistic approach of big shapes and all that stuff, and now we're going to go into the form. Just like what we would do with an oil painting, not really that different. Only difference is it's drying fast, so we have to plan for the drying speed. Okay, so we're going to mix a string of values. Hey, Evelyn's channel, welcome, welcome. We're going to mix a string of values now, ranging from dark to light. But we're not going to rely on those mixtures staying wet because this is a dry palette. So what you can do is the paint that you know to be dry, like up here, you can remove it if you want to with a razor. You gotta be careful when handling sharp objects, of course. We're gonna set this space here as our designated string of values. So that's just a standard razor. Be cautious when handling sharp objects, of course. So now, what I suggest you do is your lights should be closer to the white on your palette. And you'll see this a lot with oil painters, as typically the white is near the thumb hole of a handheld palette. Typically that's where it is, because painters tend to work in strings of values. And it's just easier to have closer access to the white. This is why yellow is typically closer to white on a standard classical painter's palette, is because you typically mix these two first, and then that one, and then that one. See? So that's what you're going to get. Hey, I wish to thank you. Hey, Kim. Welcome. So here's how simple it's going to be to make a skin color. Mix the colors as they're right next to each other. Now I've just added the red. Now I'm going to add the brown, just the burnt umber. Now I'm going to dull it out with the black. And that's it. That's how simple it is. Now we go to the blue. These colors are lined up this way so that it's going to be easier for you to achieve a skin tone. And we can test it. Put it right there. See that? It doesn't change very much. So this is an excellent base for us now to make this lighter or darker, depending on where we want to go. Now if we want to make it darker, we've got these three. Lighter, we've got these three. Keeping it as simple as possible is going to be your fastest route towards success in terms of making a painting look like something. Making the thing look like the thing, basically. Okay, so now that you hopefully follow me with how to generate a skin tone, now what we're going to do is we're going to make variations of it. Now this is going to be a darker one. And this is going to be where we're going to start with the tear duct. Now that you understand the basic premise behind mixing the skin tone, now let me inform you about my decisions with values. This is going to be the most tricky part in making a painting look realistic. That's because it's going to involve a little bit of physics. And don't worry, you're not going to have to do any calculation or anything like that. Essentially, what you're going to need to do is remember that things that are closer to perpendicular to the light, things that are closer to facing the light, are going to get lighter. Things that are closer to parallel to the light are going to get darker. And you're going to have to adjust every single value now based on your judgment of where something is relative to the light. Might sound like a lot to take in, but like anything, if you put in the time to study it, you will be able to do it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. How much time you put in is going to determine how quickly you will achieve the results. Granted that you are aware of these fundamental principles that I'm telling you. In order to achieve a type of blending effect, you must work with your lights in conjunction with your darks like this. You can work wet into wet like this, and as you'll see later on, you can work wet into dry. When acrylics are in between dry and you try to add paint onto them, they will start to lift. And you can actually use that lift to your advantage. So really you can't lose. In the beginning it's going to look like she's got a black eye. It's going to look all kinds of distorted and messed up. But you just gotta trust in the process. Now I'm gonna go from dark to light. Like I said in the beginning, it's gonna look like she has a black eye. It's gonna be, this is an awkward stage because the painting is starting to look human, but you can tell it's a very incomplete human. And that's what makes it look awkward to you. I'm going to use the blue. We're going to start to mix up the color, mix the color for the eye. So in a portrait painting, the eyes, the nose, the cheekbones are the most important for you to address. The mouth almost paints itself so long as you focus on the shapes surrounding the lips. now we can start to walk our way over to the other side. Same mixtures, just with less of these. So remember I said the trickiest part is being able to predict what value would give the desired effect to create the curvature of the form. Now you can see why those outlines were so important. Now we can move on to the nose. The cheekbone, we'll get to those planes first, but afterwards. But first, I want to now start to paint in some of the planes for the nose, starting with the shadow. Remember, these colors are arranged this way because it'll make it easier for you to mix skin tones. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different variations of them, and that's it. I'm going to adjust the light sensitivity on my camera so you can actually see the values. It's also important to stand up once in a while. I typically don't like having a palette next to the painting. I know it's better for you, and I do it for you, but it kind of hurts my arm and my neck to paint this way. So I actually don't recommend it. Always have a palette, I'd say, on the bottom. So same concept, we're working our way from the dark up to the light. No different. And I always say watch out for the dark triangle, which is why I'm going to edit this. I mean dark rectangle, sorry, I gave you the answer in the question. Watch out for the dark rectangle, and I typically go for that, a triangle. working our way to the side plane of the nose. Colors are towards the gray. We're going to utilize this tone as something that we're going to build up towards. So now we're going to mix darker values. But first, I'm going to adjust the drawing a little bit. I think the face is too wide. Just my best guess. Okay, so we're going to use the bigger brush, this one, to start to add the planes. And we're going to work one section at a time. So we're going to isolate the the bottom lower side plane of the edge of the face first. So we're going to isolate this little strip of real estate here. And if it confuses you, then drawing it out on a separate sheet of paper and mapping out where the planes are going to fit would be a good step to take. Okay, so now I'm going to thin the paint out, just like we did there. Maybe add some glaze medium. While the paint is still wet. Just leaving a glimpse of that. Like I said, now from here we're going to move there. And this is just setting it up so that we can add the planes onto it. Don't think that this is going to be the end all. We're just setting up the planes. Applying the scaffolding so that we can put all the engineering stuff onto the face. And like with any glaze, I'll add straight white to it while it's still active. So we have that plane. Contrast is key, especially with acrylics because the darks don't really read that well. Okay, so now we can go ahead and put the true values and colors. Now obviously, as we applied that, it's quite evident that this is too round. So we're gonna go back into this plane here, even though it's still in between dry. It may lift a little bit, but that's a risk that is worth taking, that it's worth to take. So this will be the start of the true values. Another integral piece of advice that I have for you with acrylic, especially with portrait, is it is much easier to work with a textured cotton canvas than it is with a smooth panel. And that's just because there's so many layers of acrylic, the thin layers, that it just starts to become smooth, and it's actually almost too smooth on a panel with all those layers, in my opinion. Okay, so that's all right for the cheekbones. I mean, we got the pinkish color. We fixed that shape. We didn't blend this out just yet, but it's all right. Now we're in a good place to move towards the mouth. Then once we finish up this area, then we'll give everything else another round of adjustment, and then the painting will be finished. So pretty decent for about an hour, 16 minutes now, but we'll stay here for longer than pretty much all my live streams this year. Not a big crowd, but hopefully somebody's here watching. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, you'll be able to watch this as a pre-recorded video in the future. Only adding as much paint as I need because this dries fast. For the mouth, always try to find where the top middle of the upper lip, where it is relative to the bottom middle of the nose. The distance between the two is the philtrum, the teardrop looking shape here. And that's the shape I'm talking about. Bottom middle to top middle. This is the distance from the nose to the mouth. Also, the shape itself is the philtrum. We already addressed the shapes around the lips. That's why we're working on the lips right now, as opposed to planing out the area around the lips. But the lips, we can paint them this way now because everything here is already accounted for. I'll start to paint the planes around the mouth. Around the lips. like I said, knowing where to place the planes, what values go where, is the difficult part, the more analytical part. So I've got more or less kind of like a 3D model in my head of where these planes are going to fit. And I won't get it right first try most of the time. As you see, I'm always adjusting. So around the mouth and the nose, there are a lot of layers. So starting to get really smooth. Okay, so now we're kind of free to move around. So I'm gonna move around to different areas. Still kind of tied up with the lips though. It's always something with the lips. That's what Sargent said. But the main purpose, remember, is not to recreate the photograph. Now I'll adjust the light sensitivity again. It's starting to look dark and I need to stand up. Remember, we're building up to the light. Remember I said we'd paint over the eyebrows a lot? And that's what we've done again. So about almost 2 hours now, and we've now covered pretty much all of it. And now we're gonna just basically do the same thing over, go over the darks, build up again to a finish. And now I think I've got to adjust the light sensitivity once again. Now that we've gotten all the lights covered, which this palette's gonna look extra bright once we do that. Always a good idea to stand. Like I said, as it starts to dry, things are gonna get darker, a little bit weird as they start to dry. But we will now start to use the wet into dry technique. I'm just curious. The planes are pretty much the same decision making as with oil paint, but we've had a really low percentage of comments and viewing this time around. So perhaps it could be that, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section if you're still watching this video at this point. Or you could be using it as a sleeping aid too, and that's alright. But it could be that acrylic is just not as interesting to you. It's my theory. And if that's the case, then the future videos will be oil paint. Essentially, the decision making with the planes is pretty much the same. That is, whether I use acrylic or oil paint doesn't matter to me. I just need some feedback. Any feedback, really. You can tell me my painting's terrible if you want to, that's okay. But some kind of feedback. If I find that the majority of you prefer oil paint, then we'll do mostly oil paint and acrylic once in a while. Either way, this video is already in the acrylic playlist. And you can even, after this sits and dries for a little while, you can even go in the same day, you could add oil paint onto it. So that versatile. Okay, so I believe I have to adjust the light sensitivity for the last time, and mostly keeping it darker the way it was for the palette, so it'd be easier for you to see the palette and the colors as we continue to build it. Obviously, it's not what I would consider a finished painting, but it's a demonstration of the classical approach, classical style approach. So it's all right for about 2 hours, 10 minutes. So far, this is the longest live stream we've had this year. We can do some other ones, probably with oil paint, or we can start with acrylic and then apply oil paint to it. But once again, thank you so much for watching. I wish you the very best, and I'll see you on the next one.